know how the Cold War began, what events took place, and how it finally ended.
Hey guys, it's Tris. Today, we are delving into one of the most significant
and intriguing periods of the 20th century, the Cold War.
We explore the gripping tale of how the world was divided into two superpower blocks, each vying for supremacy without engaging in direct warfare. The epic battle that is now known as the Cold War. If you find this video interesting, it would be great if you could support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. Let's rewind to the aftermath of World War II, where the once-elite superpowers found themselves in a precarious position. The destruction of the war had left Europe in ruins, and each nation had different plans for the future. The United States aimed to stabilize the political and economic situation by establishing international organizations, while the Soviet Union sought to expand its sphere of influence by installing Soviet-leaning regimes in countries liberated from German rule. This ideological clash quickly escalated, leading to critical events like the Berlin blockade in 1948, where the Soviets cut off West Berlin from the Western world, sparking a massive airlift by the United States and its allies to supply the city with essentials. The following year, NATO was formed as a military alliance between Western nations, and the world began to witness the rapid development of nuclear weapons, escalating the stakes of the conflict. This marked the consolidation of two distinct blocs, Western and Eastern, setting the stage for further escalation of the Cold War. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, proxy wars became common, with the Korean War and the Vietnam War being prime examples. These conflicts saw the United States and the Soviet Union supporting opposing sides without engaging in direct confrontation. The Korean War, which erupted in 1950 when North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea, drew the United States and its allies to defend South Korea, while China and the Soviet Union supported North Korea. The war resulted in a stalemate near the 38th parallel, leading to an armistice in 1953. Despite the end of hostilities, tensions persisted, and the demilitarized zone became one of the most heavily fortified areas in the world. With more than 1 million soldiers stationed along the border, the proxy wars epitomized the Cold War's indirect confrontations, demonstrating how the superpowers would clash through allies to avoid direct warfare. The Vietnam War, on the other hand, was a long and brutal conflict that spanned from the mid-1950s to 1975. It began as a struggle between communist forces in North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh, and the United States-supported government of South Vietnam. The United States became involved in the early 1960s, providing military advisors and later deploying troops to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. However, the war proved to be a quagmire for the United States, with mounting casualties and public opposition at home. In 1973, the United States finally withdrew from the Vietnam War, but the conflict between North and South Vietnam continued until North Vietnamese forces overran Saigon in 1975, leading to the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. Adjacent to Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia were also embroiled in conflict during this period. The United States and its allies conducted covert operations in these countries, aiming to disrupt the communist path at Lao in Laos and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Despite these efforts, both Laos and Cambodia eventually fell to communist forces, furthering the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, in Africa, the Congo gained independence from colonial rule in 1960. Patrice Lumumba became its first prime minister, but a separatist movement in the south, particularly in Katanga, aimed to monopolize the region's abundant uranium deposits. Belgium, which previously controlled the area, supported the separatists, while the Soviet Union and Third World countries stood by Lumumba's government. The situation turned into a complex power struggle, with the CIA plotting to overthrow Lumumba. In 1961, Lumumba was arrested and later executed by pro-Western forces, leading to the reunification of the Congo under a government favored by the United States. This episode exemplified the role that decolonizing nations played as a battleground for influence between the United States and the Soviet Union. In the United States, President John Kennedy took office and advocated a policy of peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union, while continuing the containment of communism. However, a significant turning point came with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had already strained United States-Cuban relations, and the subsequent Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 further exacerbated these tensions. The near brush with nuclear war during this crisis led both superpowers to reassess their strategies, ushering in a period of Détente in the 1970s. This event further strained relations between the United States and Cuba, as Castro aligned his government with the Soviet Union. In Africa, another major event occurred when the Non-Aligned Movement, an international organization dedicated to representing the interests of countries not formally aligned with or against any major power bloc, held its fourth conference in 1973, with 75 countries participating. This movement aimed to assert the independence of non-aligned nations during the Cold War, with several countries from South America, where the United States refused to recognize any communist regime, joining the movement. However, in Chile, a different political scenario unfolded. Salvador Allende was elected as president in 1970, and his socialist policies moved Chile closer to the Soviet Union, seeking to break away from dependence on the United States. In response, the CIA plotted Allende's downfall. On September 11, 1973, a military coup led by Augusto Pinochet overthrew Allende's government. Pinochet established a long-lasting military dictatorship, suppressing political opposition and implementing severe human rights violations. In the Middle East, tensions escalated between Israel and its neighboring Arab countries. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel, starting the Yom Kippur War. The Soviet Union supported the Egyptian and Syrian attacks, while the United States provided aid to Israel. The war ended after about 2 weeks, but it underscored the ongoing tensions between the superpowers and their proxies in the region. In the early 1980s, the period of Détente came to an end, as new leadership emerged on both sides. In the United States, President Ronald Reagan adopted a more confrontational stance towards the Soviet Union, increasing military spending and launching the Strategic Defense Initiative. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov and then Konstantin Chernenko briefly held power before Mikhail Gorbachev took office in 1985. Gorbachev's leadership brought significant changes to the Soviet Union. He introduced policies of glasnost and perestroika, seeking political freedom, transparency, and economic reforms to address the stagnation in the country. Gorbachev's policies had a profound impact both domestically and internationally. At home, they led to greater political openness, allowing for criticism and debates previously suppressed by the state. However, these reforms also revealed deep-seated problems within the Soviet system, leading to internal unrest and calls for more radical change. Externally, Gorbachev sought to improve relations with the West. He engaged in summit meetings with United States President Ronald Reagan, leading to landmark agreements such as the INF Treaty, which eliminated intermediate-range nuclear missiles from Europe. This Détente period was marked by attempts to ease tension and foster cooperation between the superpowers. However, not all was smooth sailing during Gorbachev's tenure. The Chernobyl nuclear accident in 1986 exposed the weaknesses in the Soviet system and triggered a crisis of confidence both at home and abroad. the Soviet Union faced criticism for its handling of the disaster, which further undermined the government's legitimacy. Despite these challenges, Gorbachev pressed forward with his reforms, but they faced staunch opposition from hardliners within the Soviet leadership. In August 1991, a coup attempt was made against Gorbachev, seeking to reverse his reforms and restore the old order. The coup ultimately failed due to popular resistance and divisions among the coup leaders. This event further weakened the Soviet Union's central authority and accelerated the disintegration of the Union. Amid these developments, Eastern European countries were experiencing their own transformations. In Poland, the Solidarity movement, led by Lech Walesa, gained momentum and support, challenging the Communist Party's monopoly on power. The Polish government's inability to suppress the movement effectively marked a turning point. Similarly, Hungary and Czechoslovakia initiated reforms and political liberalization. Following in Poland's footsteps, the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 was a symbol of the changing times, signaling the end of the East-West divide in Germany and paving the way for German reunification in 1990. The events in Eastern Europe culminated in 1991, when the Soviet Union officially dissolved, with its constituent republics declaring independence. The end of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War, effectively concluding the decades-long rivalry between the superpowers. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union symbolized the collapse of the communist bloc, marking the end of a tense and complex era that had shaped the world for nearly half a century. In conclusion, let's summarize the key points we've covered about the Cold War. This was a multifaceted and tumultuous period that shaped the second half of the 20th century. The ideological clash between the United States and the Soviet Union, two superpowers with opposing ideologies, led to a global rivalry. The beginning of the Cold War can be traced back to the immediate aftermath of World War II, with pivotal events such as the Berlin blockade, the formation of NATO, and the development of nuclear weapons. Marking the divide into Western and Eastern blocs, the Cold War was characterized by indirect confrontations, witnessed in the form of proxy wars. Most notably, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. It was a period of significant tension, highlighted by events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, with periods of relative calm such as Détente. The era finally concluded with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, signaling the end of this global rivalry. The Cold War's legacy continues to influence international relations and geopolitics today. It serves as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of unchecked hostility and the importance of diplomacy and cooperation in resolving conflicts. As we explore the events of this remarkable era, let's learn from its lessons and strive to build a more peaceful and interconnected world, where dialogue and understanding prevail over division and confrontation. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.